most when we look at faith. In Hebrews chapter 8, and even if we look through history, we look at faith and we look at Abraham because of what he did and his lifelong commitment to faith. But Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 8, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place that he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city that hath foundations, whose builder and maker was God. Now, if you look at Genesis chapter 12, we'll see the call of Abraham. Now, this was not the initial call of Abraham. Genesis 12 and 1 and 3 talks about this, but when we read through the history, we read a little bit if you read in Nehemiah and some in Acts, it talks about that there's an initial call that Abraham, even before this, but historically what happened is Abraham and his family and father moved, and then after his father passes away, then Abraham, Sarah, and Lot break off from the rest of the family and move from there. They initially live in Mesopotamia, which is a little bit to the east of where they wind up as. He starts out in Mesopotamia, in that golden crescent, in that fertile place, in that place that was easy to live and easy to survive, and God calls him out of there into the promised land of Canaan. But in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 1, now the Lord hath said unto Abraham, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house into a land I will show thee. I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now, this is the call of Abraham. Abraham is called from where he's at. God's calling him out to become more, to do more, to go to a different place than where he is. And as I said, he starts out to the east. If we think about where Israel is, if we look to the east of there, there's a little bit of a desert land, but on the other side of the desert land, if you kind of go north and to the east, is to the original places where Abraham is, and then he travels, and his travels bring him to Canaan. The travels bring him to what is the land of promise for him. But faith, and when we look at faith, when we look at Abraham, when we look at this faith, when we look at the stories of Abel and Enoch and Noah, we see those that worship and that walk and they witness by their faith. But when we look at Abraham's life, we see all of those things, but we also see a life of action. We see a life of obedience, of time after time that Abraham obeys God. Over and over, we see this happening. With the call of Abraham, God changes how he interacts with humanity. He changes how he deals with humanity. We see this beginning of the if you will, I will, that Abraham covenant. We see that beginning of God says, if you'll get thee out of thy country, and then I will make of thee a great nation. If you do these things, then I'll do these things. Not that our relationship with God is a fiduciary relationship where we have to spend favor, that we have to do these things to build up favor. But again, as I've said before, when we obey God, it puts us in a place that God's able to bless us. When we obey Him, it puts us in a place that we're able to be blessed, and that we're able to be in an area that God is able to work in our lives. And so when God says, if you'll do this, I'll be able to do this. If you'll obey me, then I'll be able to reach into your life. If you do the right things, then I'm able to work in your life. And we see this in Abraham. With this call of Abraham, God changes his dealing with humanity. Previously, God separated the world of the ungodly by destroying with the flood, and the godly was saved in the ark. Now with Abraham, we see that God begins to separate him from the nations, and This call of Abraham marks the historical moment that God's program to redeem and save humanity. From this very beginning, God's plan, if we look from the very beginning, God had this plan. It wasn't just happenstance. The birth of Jesus Christ was not happenstance. The birth of all of these things that happened, and this is the beginning that we begin to see this nation of Israel being formed. There had to be a time in history that Christ had to be born at the time that he was. If you look historically, and if you look at how the world was, and if you watch history, Christ is born at this pinnacle of history when Roman civilization was at its peak. There was a time place that one nation essentially ruled the known world. There was a road system in place that you could travel from one place to the other. There was a postal service in place so letters could be sent. All of this is the crux of history that Jesus is being born at. And so when the church is, and it's the time frame for the church to be dispersed, there was a dispersal mechanism for the church that Paul could get on a ship and travel through Asia and have his missionary journeys. If he would have happened 100 years before, that would have not have been able to be possible. If it would have happened a couple of 100 years or 100 years after, it would not have been able to be possible. There's one time in humanity under what's called Pax Romana, when the Romans ruled the world, that Paul was able to have his missionary journeys, that Paul was able to write a letter and know that the letter was going to get to the church at Ephesus, that he knew that these things were going to happen. So that all happens historically in time, and here we are in whatever this is, 1921 BC is the estimated time, that 1900, 2,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, before the church is coming into play, that God begins to call Abraham, and we see this beginning of God's program to redeem and save humanity. He calls one man out, and in this, he begins to save the world. So Abraham is the beginning of this, and from this devoted man would become a family who would know and teach and keep the ways of God. We had a conversation at the house the other day, and we were talking about, how did we go from Methuselah, and whether Methuselah served God, or whether did Lamech serve God, and how do we get from Enoch to Noah and the generations there in between, and there's some assumptions that you can make, but no real knowledge because of Enoch had passed away, and then there's 70 years between Enoch's passing and Noah's birth. There's about 70 years or so. And so how did this pass along? Because there was no generational of someone serving God generation after generation. That had not occurred. You had these names that pop up that serve God. But yet when we begin here, when we see Abraham from beginning, he leaves his family. When God calls him out of the family that he currently has, God calls him out of there and says, hey, now we're going to serve God. And we begin to see for the first time, we see this one family after another. Maybe a little bit you see in Adam to Seth, but there's no just continuation of one family that begins to serve God, and how one family. But when Abram separates himself out from this, then we see a devoted man who faith would become a family who would know and teach and keep the ways of God. From this family would come forth a chosen nation of people from the ungodly ways of the nations to do God's will. And from that would come Jesus Christ. So here we are, we're the beginning, this promised seed of a woman that even though God, it seems like it takes some time, and it seems like when we look at it from our standpoint, but we have to realize this is not accidental. Abraham leaves his family and forms the family of God. You see what had happened, there had been the flood. We talked about Noah, and we all know this. The descendants of the sons of Noah journeyed into the land of Shinar, which is later Mesopotamia, which we talked about, and decided to remain there and not be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. And this decision that they had, if we look back up, and if we go back into Genesis chapter 11, if you want to turn back one chapter from where we are, and this is the story of the Tower of Babel. And it came to pass that there they are. They said, let's go, let's make brick, let's burn them. We'll make stone and mortar and slime, and we're going to build us a city. We're going to build a tower, and we're going to go to the top of heaven. They're going to make us a name, and at least we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Now, God had told them that they needed to be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth and repopulate the earth and to do these things. And in direct opposition of that, they wanted to stay in one place. God frustrates their plans by multiplying their languages, and they couldn't understand each other. And then that causes them to scatter upon the face of all the earth. Sadly, we see when we look at this post-flood world, Noah's came and Noah's died, and generation after generation have built back up, and we have generations of people, but they're making the same mistakes post-flood as they did pre-flood. They continued to live after themselves. They continue to try to search for their own reasoning. They still don't honor God. You kind of look at that, and I guess at some point I'm just puzzled by that. Sometimes I'm just puzzled that God wipes humanity off the face of the earth except for one family, except for Noah and his 3 sons. But yet those behaviors continue on. Those behaviors continue on through. We see them that they once again turn to idolatry, sorcery, and astrology. That they just continue to leave God out of the picture. No matter what they had happened, no matter what had happened, they continue to leave God out of the picture. But yet, in this picture, where we're at in history at here, into this environment, Abraham is born. And at some point, Abraham is the descendant of Shem. He's born in Ur of Chaldees about 352 years after the flood and about 200 years after God scattered the people from the Tower of Babel. God first appeared to him in Ur when he lived in Haran, and then God calls him and his family. So into this environment of this post-Tower of Babel world where there had been confusion, where people had scattered out, there were still some of them that were here. And so here they are, and into this, God finds Abraham, and God calls Abraham out from this place of what had been in that place where they lived, was a nice place to live. It was a great place of fertile valleys and fertile lands, and it was easy to grow and easy to build and easy to live, and had nice environment, and everything was there. And that's the reason why they wanted to stay in that area. That's the reason why post-flood, let's stay here. Let's build a city here. Let's just restart civilization here. So there'd been 352 years of since the flood and 200 years after the Tower of Babel. So for about 150 years, people wanted to stay there and we just hang out here and be together here. And God separates them out, and they begin to disperse. And in this dispersal movement, we see Abraham and his fathers, God calls them away from this perfect place at the headwaters of the Tigris and the Euphrates River, and in these places that was this perfect place to live. And they begin to move, and then they move away a little bit, and then God we pick up in Genesis chapter 12. God once again calls Abraham, move away. Terah, who's Abraham's father, had taken the whole family and moved to one area, to Haran. This is the point in time that works really good if I have a map, but I don't. So we can see that there's this original movement of the whole family away from this place of the Ur of the Chaldeans as they move away. But yet God calls Abraham another time that he says, hey, I want you to separate yourself from this. So we're not told how God called Abraham, except that the glory of God appeared to Abraham. And so he calls them away. He renews the call after Terah has passed away, and the family is there. And there's this family unit that is left there in Haran, where that family had. God calls them away. And God says, it's time for you to go. It's time for you to step away from where you're at. It's time for you to be away from there, to leave your family. I have something better for you. Again, this is kind of difficult somewhat for us to understand that how this happened and the mindset of Abraham. Just, you're leaving your family for forever. And Abraham understood this, but God calls him away that calls him away to be something better, that if you'll do this, and we look back at that original call back in Genesis chapter 12, or when we look at this call back in the original scripture that we had read in Genesis chapter 12, get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, from thy father's house, and into a land I will shew thee. I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. And so there's this call of way, this call of surrender, this call to separate away, this call to pull yourself away from that. Before a sinner can seek God, God must first have sought him. God is a person, and we use them that it communicates, that he changes your life, that he will take the worst of sinners and make them the best of saints, that these things happen in lives when we're obedient, that we can see the change of God that occurs into life. But it's that calling of God that causes these things to happen. And we see that in Abraham's life, as that call of God reverses Abraham's life, reverses the trajectory of Abraham's life, that he becomes Abram is his original name, and he gets renamed to Abraham. And so Abram's life is reversed, and he becomes, because of his obedience, he becomes who he is. It reminded me of a story, and how true it is, I don't know. But I'd heard a story of this young man that got caught stealing sheep. And so he got branded on his forehead. He was a sheep thief, so they branded an S and a T on his forehead. And because he had been caught stealing sheep, and that was his punishment. So everybody knew he was a sheep thief. Well, life rolls on for this young man, and he changes his ways and becomes a Christian and serves God and becomes pious and loves the Lord and lives his life as a servant of God, and lives a life as somebody who obeys God, and lives a life as somebody who has changed his ways. And here he is, and we pick the story up, or the story is picked back up years later as this old man is known. And here he is, he still has this brand of an S and a T on his forehead. And one day he's with two young boys, and as the boys leave, one of them asks the other, why do you think he has that S and T on his forehead? And the other one says, I don't know, I guess God just thinks he's a saint, so he put it on his forehead. And so we can see in life that we can change who we are with God's reaction into our life. When God becomes involved, when we have God's presence in our life, when we have God's working in our life, it changes who we are. And so we see this in Abraham's life, that it changes who he was when he responds to the call of God. Get thee up out of this country. Separates him away. Now, this is a drastic and complete. He leaves his place of familiarity. He leaves this country that's in rich pasture land, this home and this family that he's known as successful, his successful business, whatever he had, he has leave to go to this place. But it's only in his complete surrender to God is God able to move the fullest. It's only in his complete surrender that everything is let go, that everything is gone, as God's able to use him as he was. There's the initial move where he moves from the one place over to Haran, but yet God calls him again and says, we go further. This is where I want you to get. This was unquestionably hard, but yet he goes. He goes out into the unknown, knowing only that God had called him to do so. That's all that Abraham knew. We know the rest of the story. We know who Abraham becomes. We know the story of Abraham and all the stories that come afterward, and all the blessings in Abraham's life, and all the things that happened. We know all that, but Abraham didn't. All that Abraham knew is God had called him to go. Now, you're just going to go to this place. He had God's call on his life and says, this is what you do. But yet in this, we see that he obeys. And in his obedience and his surrender, it allows God to put him in a place to be used. Remembered one time years ago, I was trying to launch the boat that I have, kind of the pontoon boat that I had, and you take the straps and stuff off of it, and you unhook and you back the trailer into the water, and it just won't come off the trailer, and you try again, and it doesn't slide off the trailer. And it's like, well, I really hadn't launched it in a while, so maybe it kind of doesn't want to come off the trailer. So you try again, and you back up a little faster and slam on brakes a little harder, and the boat still don't come off the trailer. And then you go a little deeper in the water, and it still don't come off the trailer. So you pull back on the land and realize there's one little strap that you forgot about of all the straps. Some of you fishers maybe have done that in the past, that you get to that place, but every one of those straps have to be off the trailer for that boat to float off to the trailer. And such it is in our life, that we feel like at times that we've let this go and we let that go, but there's always sometimes, if we're not careful, there's this thing that we hold on to, that hold on to our wills and our desires and our things that we want and the things that we want out of life. And this is what I'd like for my life to turn out to be like. This is what I want to go. This is the pathway I want to take. But God calls us to surrender. He doesn't call us to a life of recklessness. He doesn't call us to a life of abandonment of all things and to a life that He's not going to bless us. It's but when we let go of the things that we let go of, the things that we hold on to, that we can become like Abraham, that we can be in a place that we are fully blessed. It's only when Abraham leaves all this, it's only when Abraham lets all this go, it's only when Abraham says, I'll just let it all go. That's in the time frame that we see that Abraham, sure, there's still some things that have to happen in Abraham's life. Sure, there's still a walk that Abraham has to take, but it's in this that he changes who Abraham is, and he's be able to call into Abraham's life. This call was not only just to leave, but this call opened up the possibilities for God to move. Abraham leaving will allow God to fill into the void of what was left. And when Abraham stepping away for his family is what allowed God to create the family of God out of Abraham. Abraham leaving his family after his father passed away, all of his duties were performed. He had just Abraham and Sarah. That's who they had. And then Lot comes along with him because Lot's dad and mom had passed away. So Terah had initially taken on the responsibility of taking care of Lot. And then Abraham felt that it was his responsibility to take care of his nephew because of everyone else had passed away. But Abraham leaves all the rest. I have no other responsibilities. There's nothing else. God calls him away to be to this place, and he becomes of this, and he's able to become where he's at because not only he called him out from that, but he called him out from the beggarly elements in the presence of the living God, out of childlessness into the fatherhood of being the fatherhood of all the nations, out of obscurity into the spotlight of eternity, and out of poverty unto the blessings of spiritual provisions. Abraham to be known as a friend of God and the father of the faithful, but it's only in Abraham's obedience and letting go of all these things that God is able to do this in his life. The call of God remains the same for us. No one can we hold on to that old life of sin. Can we hold on to those things with one hand and reach out and grasp all that God has for us in the other? We can't hold on to these things that we want to still be able to do and reach out and grab that new life that we have. We're to come out from among them, to be unspotted in the world, as James says. We're not to love the world, to be a friend of the world, or conform to the world. Neither are we to live like the people of the world. And we're to have fellowship with the works of darkness, as Ephesians says. The call of God requires us to forsake all things that would hinder, whether they be affections, occupations, possessions, and follow Jesus. I set my affections on things above, not on things of the earth. Does that make us different? Sure, that makes us different, but that's the point of the call, is to make us different, to make us to this place that God's able to bless us, to make us to this place that God's able to work in our life. When those things are removed out, when we hold on to where we're at, when we still leave that one rope attached, you can have the best hot air balloon, I guess, that you could have. You leave that one rope attached, it's not going to go very far. You can have the prettiest balloon in the whole setup. You can have all that you are, but if you don't let go of all those things, you're not going to go anywhere. Such as it was, you're not going to have the fastest boat on the lake, but if you don't let go of that last boat strap, you're not going to get off the trailer. If you could have the best plane that there is, but if you're still strapped down to the tarmac, you're not going to make it to the sky. It's these little things that, if we're not careful, that affect our lives. It's these little things that we want to hold on to, that we put ourselves in a place that God can't bless us. As I'd said before with Abraham, it's not that this is as much as I have to do these things because I have to buy God's favor. It's just that I have to put myself in a place that God's able to work. When I don't release all of these things, I'm not in a place that God can move in my life. When I still hold on to this, God says, you're changing the trajectory of what I want to do for you. You're changing these things of what I'd like to be able to do. I can't do the things that I'd like to be able to do. I can't take you to the places that I'd like for you to go to. I can't ascend to the heights that I'd like for you to ascend to, because you want to hold on to these things that hold us back, that you want to hold on to this. I'd like to change all the things in your life. I'd like to make you a different person. I'd like to make you someone who's able to serve God fully, and with that comes the blessings with this covenant of Abraham's, and we see over and over in the covenants that God make. When we see, if you study through those, and God says, "Hey, if you'll do this, I'll do this." We see this again in the covenant to Moses in the end when Moses is in Deuteronomy, and he says, "Hey, I've set before you blessings and cursings, life or death. Choose life. If you'll do this, I'll bless you. If you'll choose the right path, I'll be able to. You'll be able to call on my name. I'll hear your prayers. I'll be able to do this. I'll be able to bless you. I'll be able to make you separate from the nations. I'll be able to do all of this, but you have to put yourself in a place that God's able to bless. And you have to put yourself in a place that God's able to work, that you have to have these open spaces in your life, if you will, that God's able to fill up. But if we're not careful, we want to fill those places up with our desires. We want to fill those places up with the things that we want to do. And that takes us away from where we're at. Like Abraham, the call of God is a call into something better. We're called out of sin and out of darkness into his marvelous light, into fellowship with his Son, and into his kingdom and glory, into a life of service and usefulness that brings honor and glory to God, into the eternal glory of Christ, that central point of what it is that God calls us away. He doesn't call us as much into a life here on this earth of blessings and prosperity, and can't promise you that you're going to be rich and famous just because you serve God. In fact, sometimes, much like Abraham's life, there's some persecutions that come along with it. There's some places that's a little bit rough where God's working in your life. But when you let go of all these things and you follow God's call, and we say, "All right, God, I trust you. This is where we're going to go. We're going to walk by faith." And this is where we're at. When we look at Hebrews chapter 11, when we look at this chapter, this is where we are in all of this. This is what we're looking at. In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good report. Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so things which are seen were not made of things which do appear." And so that's what we're looking at when we look at this chapter of faith. When we look at these stories of faith, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at these stories and we're realizing that Abraham was in this place, that here he was. He's looking for a city which foundations, whose builder and maker is God. So Abraham said, "I leave all of these things, and through this, that God's able to work in his life. Through this is we're able to see these changes. Through this, we're able to see all this that happens. Through this faith of Abraham, that he calls him out. Through all of this, that we're able to see this is what we're doing. This is where we're going. The trajectory may not be something that we understand in our lives. The end goal may not be something that we understand in our life. The final culmination we may not understand. Sometimes we look very finite, which is just because of the lenses which we look through, can only see so far. I can only see so far into the future, very, very little at all of any promise. I have hopes and I have dreams of what I would like to have happen, but that's all that they are. I can't see what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. I can't tell the future, but yet I do understand that it's in his hands. If I follow him, if I trust, if I obey, I'll just want to be in a place that I'm able to be led by him. Again, I have to live a life while I'm here. I have to do the things while I'm here. I have to walk in his footsteps while I'm here. I have to get up and go to work in the morning. I have to pay the light bill. There's a car payment or two or more at times, it seems, that need to be paid. There's gas that's got to be bought. The taxes have to get paid. All this stuff has to happen. I have to live in this life as Abraham did. Abraham had the troubles of life. He had army, and then he had to fight. There was battles that he had to fight. There was times that he had to move. There was all this stuff that happens in Abraham's life. Much it happens in ours. I can't promise you a glorious life without any problems. That's not how it happens. But what I can promise is if we follow God's word, if we follow his command, that he has a trajectory for us and that he has an end goal for us that we may not understand, but he does. He knows where we're going. I may not. The interesting thing is when we look at the scripture here in Genesis, and we've looked at Genesis chapter 12, but one other verse kind of stands out. When we look at Genesis chapter 15, and it says, after these things the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceedingly great reward. Why did Abram have to get told by God not to fear? Because he did, because he feared. And that's not something that I guess that if we're not careful of, here we are. Abraham had brought Lot. This story is that Abraham had brought Lot. Lot had grown up, and Abraham was trying to establish Lot off by himself. He was trying to do his duty, his one last duty to his family, and to take care of Lot and put Lot in a place. And he was trying to get Lot into a place that Lot had prosperity and he had what he needed. And I'm going to take care of you. But yet Lot puts himself in a place that he winds up getting captured. And Abraham has to go essentially free Lot from where he's at. And so Abraham is there after this story and after this struggle that happened. And Abraham's a bit destitute. And he says, hey, look, I mean, the very name of Abraham is almost a mockery at the beginning. Abram is his name, and he would become the father of many nations. Abram means exalted father. Abraham means a father of a multitude. So here he is, Abram. His name is Abram, which means exalted father. And if you read there in Genesis chapter 15, and that's what Abram is looking at. He says, look, my name means exalted father. I don't even have a family here that I can leave this to. He said, am I going to go childless into the world and just leave everything to the steward of my house, who's not my child? What's going to happen? Abraham was 75 years old when he restarted this journey. So here we are, even years later, where we at 80, 85 years old. Abraham's like, I don't even have a child yet. And Abraham didn't realize he still had a few years to go before he got a child. He was almost going to be 100 before he has a child. But God says he promised this. Abraham is worried because he can't see the end goal here. He's doing his best to follow after God. He's doing his best to follow these commands. He's doing his best to walk the path that God has for him. And Abraham's like, I just can't see it. And God says to Abraham, fear not, I'm thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. So Abraham did have fears. That's a reasonable thing. Abraham did have concerns. That's a reasonable thing. The thing I like here is God doesn't scold him as much for it as God is encouraging him. God doesn't say, Abraham, you're wrong for having fears, because Abraham wasn't wrong for having fears. Abraham wasn't wrong for having concerns. These were valid concerns that Abraham had, but God encourages him and says, fear not, I'm thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. In this place that we can see that the faith of Abraham overcomes his fear. The faith that Abraham hears, there's a battle between the fear of Abraham and the faith of Abraham. Abraham says, I've been acting in my faith, and I'll continue to do so. But here's his fear rising up. But in this battle of faith and fear, we can see that the faith of Abraham becomes, because Abraham does rise up. He does continue. He does continue to do all these things. He does continue to walk. And on that same day, the Lord gave a covenant to Abraham and says, unto thy seed I'll give this land. So once again, God says, if you'll stay faithful of where it's at, then I'll be able to bless you. The faith of Abraham that calls out, says, I'll continue the walk. Even when I don't understand what's going on, even though I don't really understand what's happening, even though I can't really understand what the next step is, I'll take that next step of faith. I'll continue to have that faith on something that I can't see, on something that I can't understand, on the walk the way that I have. Of all this that happens, Abraham says, I don't understand. I don't understand. I can't really see the substance. I can't see what's going to happen. I can't see the evidence of what's going to happen, but I'm going to take the next step, and I'll continue. I'll tell fear, you got to take a back seat. It may have still been there, but faith overrode it. Fear was still there, but faith overrode it, such as it can be in our life, that we can continue to obey. He went out not knowing where he was going. He obeyed God. He endured the hardships and looked forward to a city built by God. I've been in similar places to this, that you kind of put everything up by faith and go. And all of you have been in similar situations that we can look back and say, well, that's a big step that I took by faith, and we can see that God led, and God took us to that area years ago, 20 years ago or so. I was looking at getting into school and felt to move to Virginia to go to school up there, and I'd applied to the school there and had applied, I guess, too early or didn't get accepted, but I still felt to move to that town, and so I did, which is awful interesting to try it. I only recommend doing these things when you're young. It makes a whole lot more sense to make dumb decisions when you're young, because maybe they're you're resilient and you can put up with those decisions. But this was not a dumb decision, but it sure was on paper. Get yourself a 30-foot U-Haul, pull all your stuff in it, and move. Move 5 or 6 states away. Don't have a job. Don't know anybody there. Just try it. See how it works out. It worked out for me, but it felt like God was moving us to that area, needed to move there. We went up to visit for 1 week, went up and was looking with a realtor and talked to a realtor and found a house and found a church and moved up. Didn't have a job. We're still working on that. No place to go, no place to live, no place to put my stuff when I got up there. But God works it all out. But that by faith, it wound up, yep, it was the right decision. Yep, got into school. Yep, decided I hate the snow and I hate the mountains and moved back closer to home. So, these things work out when you move by faith. But it's only in that complete abandonment is God able to move in your life. And in Abraham's life and his complete abandonment and his complete show journey into this land of promise and his complete leaving of all these things behind that he's called out out of his family, out of from where he was at, he was able to receive an inheritance because he had left the other one behind. He was able to receive these things because he had left the other behind. He was able to receive the blessings because he had left all that other behind. And such as it is in our life that we're able to see, Abraham didn't ask any questions. He didn't demand signs or evidence. And he took those reservations. He took that fear and said, okay, yep, I've got it, but I'm going to set it aside. And by faith, I'm going to continue. By faith, I'm going to continue to see where I'm at. He didn't evaluate on a principle of security. It wasn't the most secure thing for Abraham to do is move away from where he was at. It wasn't the right decision if you looked at it from an earthly standpoint for Abraham to move away from where he was at. That wasn't the right decision. Abraham should have stayed where he was at. Abraham should have stayed in the place that he was at. Abraham should have stayed where he was at. But when we move away from the right decision and when we look at things from a carnal mindset, when God is calling us away, I'm not telling you to go make stupid decisions and move 3 or 4 states away unless God's calling you away. But when God calls you away, that's the only right decision that you can do. When God calls you to do something, that's the only right decision for your life. When God calls you, He's placed that path up there and you're walking in that path and you're going to the place that God wants you to go. It's when we walk in that path that He's able to bless him. Knowing every step of the way is not faith at all. Knowing what's going to happen isn't faith. If Abraham had knew this is where you're going to go and this is where you're going to go and this is what's going to happen, and you're going to have a son be born in 25 years from now. You're going to have that son of promise. You're going to have all the things that you want out of your life. That wouldn't have been faith, but it was only when he took a step not knowing what was going on, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know where I'm going. When he's able to take that step, not knowing what the consequences are going to be, but knowing that God has called me in this direction, that where we are, when he reaches the promised land, Abraham goes through this area and he goes from place to place and he wanders that promised land. And God's promised him that where your feet are is where your family is going to be. Abraham waits patiently and continues to stay faithful, even though he didn't see all the rewards in his time frame. But Abraham knew that if I'll follow God, the trajectory that I'll be on will put me in this place. That when in the end, when Abraham says, yeah, I can see it now, but it took years and years, 50, 60 years of Abraham's life that we can see that Abraham, when he dies at 175 years old, 100 years after his leaving, 100 years after that second call of God, 100 years after, 75 years after his son of promise was born, Abraham looks back and says, yeah, I can see it now, but it sure looks different than what it was 100 years ago. But it's only in that Abraham becomes the benchmark of faith. As I'd said at the beginning, when we think of faith, you think of Abraham because of his actions and his continual moving in his continual doing of following God in the face of it didn't seem like it was the right thing to do. He follows God, and God's able to bless. Grateful to have everyone here this morning.